Hi. We can hear you, but now we can see you. Hello.
Hi.
Can you hear us clearly?
I hear you very well.
Great. So I'm gonna turn you up a bit, and Peter's gonna introduce the talk, and that you unfortunately are not gonna be able to see him at the moment. Or should I?
That's fine. These are all exercises in
There he is.
control and loss of it. Yeah.
Okay.
Great.
Good afternoon to all here in the Rudolfinum Gallery. It's for us exceptional opportunity to talk directly with Taryn, which is New York-based artist. She's now in London. And on the opposite side, in Czech Republic, here in Rudolfinum, is Michal Nanoru, or Michal Nanoru, ready for the talk about the exhibition, which is the most important thing. This is the main focus here in Rudolfinum Gallery, and the exhibition is running until 10th July. So, Taryn, Michael.
Okay, thank you, Peter. Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming to Galerie Rudolfinum for this extraordinary opportunity to talk with Taryn Simon, the artist of our current exhibition here. It is her largest exhibition in Europe in terms of number of works and number of series, one of the largest in general. I'm sure that I don't have to introduce Taryn to any of you, because you've been familiar with her work and you've seen the show, but just briefly. Taryn is a multidisciplinary artist who has worked in photography, text, sculpture and performance. Her practice involves, and now we lost her image, and there she is. Her practice involves extensive research guided by an interest in systems of categorization and classification. That might happen. Simon's work has been a subject of exhibitions at Museum of Modern Art in New York, Tate Modern in London, Neue Nationalgalerie in Berlin, Whitney Museum of American Art in New York, and is in permanent collections in Metropolitan Museum of Art, Tate Modern, and the Guggenheim, as well as Centre Georges Pompidou and the Los Angeles County Museum of Art. Now, Taryn, hi, you're in London right now, right?
Yeah.
Where today people are voting on staying or leaving EU. Is there a particular reason for you to be there? Are you going to vote? You're not able to vote there, right?
I wish I could vote, but sadly I can't. I'm going to be hopefully going this evening to watch the counting at Alexandra Palace.
Okay, is that a part of your work in any way, or?
Yes.
Yes. Can you, or can't you?
We'll see. I'm sort of interested in seeing it, and I don't know what.
Okay. Anyway, I want to start with talking about the way, or start addressing the ways in which you stand out in the art world today, in which you are not a regular artist per se, especially in terms of your background. Or let's start with your background. You didn't go to the art school. You studied semiotics, right? Mm-hmm. Can you maybe tell us more about how that informed your work, this area?
Yeah, I mean, to be completely honest, my initial interest in that subject matter was in fact that it was things that sort of, at a young age, I didn't have a firm handle on and found slightly overwhelming as a subject, and thereby wanted to just make it my full-time study until I could conquer it, only to realize that set out be somewhat indecipherable, but it definitely has informed all of my work in terms of sort of a dissection of and image and presentation. Are you getting feedback?
No. We're just the sound.
I think if I turn down my volume, it might be better. Is that better?
It's more about the transfer. It's not about the feedback, but we'll see how it works.
Okay.
Because some of the words are not clear when you speak.
Is it clearer now?
It's better.
Because I have it resting.
Maybe if you speak a little bit slower.
Sure. Is that better?
Yep.
Okay. I actually removed a tape dispenser from behind the screen. Perhaps that's helpful. So I initially went to university for environmental science, and that was the field that I had primarily wanted to practice in. And then I had always been an image maker from a very early age with my father and my grandfather, and that certainly carried forward into my university years as well. And that's when I started to explore semiotics, and that became a big part of my work. So everything sort of, I had all these different disciplines that I guess sort of functioned as a constellation that you can still see in my work itself, going in all these different directions.
So you've been making photographs since early age?
Yes.
And what was that? You were influenced by your father and your grandfather, that's right? Is that right?
Yeah.
Yep.
My father worked abroad, and he would constantly bring back these images of very distant places. Is it working?
Yep, it's working perfectly right now.
I'm gonna just turn mine up there. And that was sort of how I got to learn about the larger world through his photographs. And they were much more of people and places, and some forbidden sites as well. And my grandfather, conversely, was interested in minerals and rocks and flowers and stars and the invisible. And his stuff had a much more sort of focused macro view. And both of them were big influences in my life. And I would sort of go on these different expeditions with them and never really thought of it as anything beyond something to do with them. And it's slowly seeped into, I guess, life's pursuit. But
and what did your father do? Was he in Secret Service or?
No, well, he was working with the State Department, and he was in Thailand at one point. He started working with. I guess it was a time when the United States was promoting capitalism to counter communism, and so they were creating things like housing with mortgages and the stock exchange in Thailand, for example, and things like this. And he was a laborer in that pursuit.
Yeah, I was just wondering where the cultural capital comes from, and the relationship to all this political.
Yeah, I mean, he's actually quite a conspiracy theorist and a very influential figure in my life, and somebody who is quite disillusioned and constantly seeing the opposite to what is presented, and that's definitely been in the background of everything in my life.
Yeah, well, that certainly can be seen in your work, like doubting everything. it almost seems inappropriate to ask all these personal questions about your background, because your work is so impersonal in a way, in the way that you create the language of authority, where you almost remove yourself as the author from the work that you, I think, deliberately want to be to disappear from the work, so that it appears much more, it has much more authority there. So there's a big distance between you as a person and the artwork. And sometimes I wonder how much, or where does this end? Where does the artwork end? And how much of a deliberate creation is your media personality and the way that you present yourself? Because somewhere you talk about the photograph not being only the work, because there's a caption and there's a frame, and then there's the installation, and it's all part of the work. So where does this actually end? Is there an end to the work or not for you?
Right. Well, I mean, I've said it before, I think even in love or in family relations or wherever you think there's some sort of understanding and closeness, and that it is the epitome or the nucleus of a private sense of self, that space is still somehow governed and part of the machine. So I would say it doesn't really, it doesn't, I think it's almost impossible for it to end anywhere that we can see. And I would say the same for you and the audience and everything.
Okay, but it's not a usual thing for most of the artists. It's like their work ends with a frame mostly. But you're very much invested in the graphic design, in the design of the captions, of the promotional materials and everything that surrounds the stuff, and that is a thing of control, right? It's a way of controlling your message, how your message gets across. But also most a topic that occurs in your work again and again is that you cannot control everything. Like the Field Guide to the Birds of the West Indies is all about those producers that put many millions into the text, into artwork, that they cannot really control, because someone can use it as an atlas of birds, this hilarious, almost nonsensical thing. So how do you see this in terms of your work? Because you also invest, I don't know if that's millions, but it's years of work into controlling the work. But you also very well know that you cannot control that.
Yeah, it's a torture, and you cite it perfectly. And it's definitely it feels simultaneously so important and yet impossible. And you know the end before even starting, but it's a compulsion as well. So part of it is intellectual and something that I'm conscious of, and it's an academic decision. And then there is that part, but as I just said, that part has to be somehow structured from something else, in fact. And so it's not subconscious, but it's something that I do in all areas of life. It's when I get on the airplane, I have to meet the pilot in the cockpit. I have to look him in the eyes because I want to know who is flying the plane. And for some reason that makes me feel more comfortable on the plane. But it's trying to sort of garner as much understanding and a way of organizing and ordering and being able to inhabit something safely and feel that there is some sense of reason in it, but at the same time being aware that it's going to shatter. And the work hopefully exists on that sort of line between the two, or in this liminal space that's sort of a third space.
To get your works or to understand that fully, or in a way that you would expect people to understand that, they have to absorb a lot of text or information. How do you? What do you expect from people coming to your exhibitions to know, or do you think that they're gonna go through? Because we had discussions about the content of the vitrines in the picture collection or in the field guide, where there's tons of documents with a lot of text and stuff like that, and we discussed how many of them are going to be read, and what do you expect from the viewer? Do you expect that they absorb everything there, or how do you negotiate this?
Well, I mean, part of the work is performative in that way, because I'm aware of the dance that the viewer enacts within the space, and that you're going to get all of these different reads, and that's how rumors start and issues of translation arise, and you have the committed person who reads everything and claims to have full understanding of it, and even they are still going to be at a distance. And then you have the person who just touches onto 2 lines and then passes it on to their friend who's with them, who then looks at the image, maybe doesn't read the text, and then passes it on to someone, and it takes on a whole new identity. Then you have all the cultural judgments that you're going to bring to the image based on whatever your history is. I mean, there's multiple truths in every image and in every text, and the work is about, but one component of the work is highlighting the multiple readings and the sort of endless interpretation of something that feels so anchored.
Yeah. That also the meanings of that travel not only in space, like going to, Image Atlas is about the impossibility of universal language or image as a universal language, but your work travels as well like this. It's translated and it enters very, very different regions where you know very little about the cultural histories or backgrounds of the people, where they can interpret it very, very differently, and that's what you talked about. But also, a topic for you is how meaning travels through time. Time capsule, that's a fascination of yours. Maybe you can explain later why is that so. But how far how far in the future can you predict how the work is going to be read? Because, for example, now we're showing Contraband here, and during the refugee crisis, this cannot be not interpreted as a meditation on what can travel through borders in terms of things, ideas, or people. Even though the work was created before anything like that was happening. Do you think about that? How the work is going to be interpreted in near future or further future, 1,000 years from here, as in terms of the Black Square?
Yeah, I do, and a lot of the works are actually about that in their subject. There was a chapter in A Living Man Declared Dead and other chapters that was specifically about the history of human exhibitions, and then the relationship of my art to that practice and the evolution of these things through time. And then there's a Black Square work as well of a book that was written to the future that was put into a time capsule that is positing the loss of an understanding of the English language, and literally graphically trying to present to a future 5,000 years from now how to reconstruct what English was and have some understanding of all the material that is likely left behind. I've also made, I think the best artworks, or what I think art is capable of doing, is confronting time and having the past, the past and the present and the future all collide in literally one moment, one read, one fixed step. So, and that's sort of unique to it. But the work that I just completed is very much about photography's ability to take something out of time's continuum and preserve it in this state of ceremony, and to allow something to last versus and looking at the politics of that preservation versus the sort of continuum of time and the turning and the ways in which things tarnish and shift. And the works themselves, as you spoke about, when they travel to different countries and they're viewed under different politics and different economic situations and different environmental situations, it can often be used as propaganda as well for different directions. And that's also why I am so acutely aware of the text that accompanies these works. And when you talk about those levels of control, the way I try and I pay enormous attention to a press release or a wall text or even graphic design, what that can convey and what that means. These aren't just aesthetic controls, these are also, it's an awareness of how the work can be used and trying to limit that use and simultaneously allow its use and allow it to get lost and record its loss as well and collect its loss and see how it behaves and turns. Like an American Index of the Hidden and Unfamiliar has traveled throughout the world. That is a work that was produced post-September 11th. It had a very specific time period that it was made in, and what that represented to the rest of the world and what it continues to represent to all these different nations as it travels around it holds different powers in different sites, and I'm constantly having to have pretty loaded conversations about what it is positing about the United States of America, for example. And then other works like A Living Man Declared Dead and other chapters, it just not so long ago went to China, where it was censored. So I had an exhibition where I painted all black fields on the wall where the works would have hung. And it became, the project has sort of a pulse and a blood of its own that just keeps mutating and changing under these different directives.
Yeah, well, I was curious to learn that you, with this investment in control, that you work through proxies now, making the last black square, where you were in control in a way, but also you were not there at all. You can you maybe talk about that? Is that a evolution of sorts for you, or maybe you can first introduce the whole project?
Yeah. So what's being spoken about is a black square that I made out of vitrified nuclear waste in Russia, and I collaborated with Russia's State Atomic Energy Corporation to produce this piece, which is in the shape and size of Malevich's black square, and it's been buried for what will likely be at least 1,000 years until it loses its nuclear properties. And that's the timeline that the Russian nuclear agency has given for it becoming safe for human interaction. In the United States, something of a similar substance would be given something like 1 million years in terms of the timeline for that to take place. So, and I produced the black square through a series of directions that I would send over that were then translated into Russian and presented to people working within the plant. And I went to the plant as well, but I'm not allowed to enter in. I can only go to the gate where I can collaborate and speak to the person who's making my black square and also those that are labeling it and burying it, but I can't actually get past that gate because of my American passport. And so we have this work of art that's being created and conveyed through translation, through fences, over Skype and via email, and just all these modes of communication that are by proxy, essentially. And the end result is something that is, for a future that is not my own, that is not for my children, not my children's children, but to a distant population that I can't even imagine what they will be. And I've written a letter to the future that was put in a stainless steel capsule specifically made to be able to withstand the nuclear properties, and it was cast within the black square. So the idea is if the directions survive, even saying that letter is in the black square, and if the English language can be read, one would have to decide, are they going to shatter the black square to read the letter or preserve the black square itself? And then it just, the comedy just keeps unfolding because we ended up having to, we went to film the making of the black square, which the camera work just wasn't the way that I had asked for it to be, and a lot of errors occurred, and I wasn't happy with the footage. So now we had to go and reshoot it and cast another black square, which would allow the video of the black square to be correct. And I had to reissue my letter to the future. So there are 2 black squares and 2 letters to the future and 1 film presenting the making of a single item. And it just has this sort of endless madness.
Yeah, well, I wondered if that's a change on your side, that you allowed those people to do this for you,
It's primarily for the collection. That project in its inception was in fact designed to be more about the communication than I never imagined it would actually become material, that I could achieve this, and I have. But that element was a surprise. The communication was in fact largely meant to be the work, and it suddenly became a reality.
Yeah. So the communication is the part of the work, means that you're opening the process to the viewers to see. Does that mean that if there was a request as the one that you send out when doing American Index for you being at Disneyland and for someone visiting the underground properties of Taryn Simon's studio, would that be allowed now or would that be rejected? Is the myth surrounding the creation of the work something that needs to be covered, or do you work with that intentionally somehow?
I mean, up to this point, I've purposefully, I've always considered at the end of a project, it's kind of, it's quite something, just the pile of paper that exists surrounding each project and the years of labor. And it always is a question when I get to the time of making the book, do I include all this material? And I have consistently chosen not to, but it's always a question, and all of that material exists in my archive and has been collected. But there is something about the work itself, the text and the image or the sculpture, whatever it may be at this point, just existing in an imaginary space where one has to sort of construct for themselves all those steps that they think had to surround that. And also even the ease of it, that it looks sort of deceptively easy.
But yeah, that's one thing that's very unromantic about your work process. That it's composed of emails and phone calls and paperwork, actually, right? It's like years of this tedious office work, which is what people usually don't associate with art or art making, which is quite what I like about it, that it's very, very rational, and it's not something where you imagine yourself. Well, not everyone imagines an artist as Jackson Pollock with this can of paint, but...
No, but they do. I get people coming for studio visits all the time, or wanting a studio visit, and it's literally myself and 4 people sitting at computers. There's not much to see.
Yeah, well, that is what I like. Well, that's a funny bit about that. But also, I'm being asked here, how do you get those permissions? Is it so? I always say that it's years of phone calls and stuff like that. But is there any other magical thing that you?
Yeah, there is no formula that it goes across it all, and it's completely subject to each individual that I have to somehow get to collaborate with me or allow me entry. So sometimes it's based on a desire for transparency or a political motivation, and in others it could be because we shared a cigarette, or it's you don't know.
Okay. Well, you also work with in dangerous environments, or sort of with nuclear waste, Russian
hibernating bears.
Hibernating bears, yeah, exactly. Burning fields, stuff like that. But mostly, I think, HIV virus. Mostly, what you risk is losing some time on the phone or writing emails. But Image Atlas was made with Aaron Swartz, who committed suicide after he was accused of basically downloading too many academic articles from academic journals. How as ridicule as it sounds. So he kind of paid with his life almost for this. Can you comment on that situation there with Aaron Swartz and how deliberate was the choice of him as a collaborator, as a symbol? He was a symbol of something even before his death, right?
Well, he was a symbol of transparency in the internet and in communication and exchange, and obviously what he did, or the response to what he was doing was, grossly exaggerated, and the government admitted that it was that, but too late. So, I mean, when we were working together, we were just, he was an unbelievable programmer. I mean, truly sort of wizardly, in terms of his use of computer language and his ability to just create and understand that realm. And he was under unbelievable pressure when I was working with him, and I could see it the entire time. Even the idea of him logging in to his computer and getting past just putting in the password took about 10 minutes to get into the computer. And it just revealed to me this sort of the pressure of all of the sort of scrutiny and designations that were being thrown his way. So we made the project in the wake of all of that, and we're working on it and trying to develop into something much further, even at the time of his death. And I mean, I don't know. You'd have to ask me another question. I don't know what to say about it.
Okay. Well, there's a question that I'm being asked: if your work is meant to be subversive in any way, and that's usually connected to the American Index, and I don't really answer that. So I would leave the answer to you, maybe.
Well, I mean, I think in all of the work you can see attention to sort of the systems by which authority is established and conveyed, and the ways in which we order ourselves and regulate ourselves and discipline ourselves and sort of fall into line. And in an American Index, you can imagine a subversive version of that where someone would sneak in and make all of these images, and they would be covertly taken. And my entire sort of effort in American Index was to see how far I could get with permission. Where was I able to actually collaborate with these sort of headings of authority, and as an individual not working under any corporate umbrella or political umbrella or media umbrella, what level of access could I achieve? And where are those lines between the public and the expert or the privileged or the authority? So I didn't get into any, deep zone. I'm still from another distance, and it was about what is that distance that would be granted if I pushed harder than most.
But all of them, except for the Disney world, right, where they allowed you to be there, and you kind of became a part of their agenda in a way, right? It's like the U.S. Army, they had to have their intention in letting you show the explosion or something like that. So it cannot be really.
You never know when you're part of the system, or when the system is actually a little just more unorganized than you imagine it to be. So it can be both.
Okay. Well, that's a.
I mean, there is something about going into the epitome of technological innovation, and like NASA or something, walking inside, and it's locked in the Cold War era in terms of every piece of equipment that surrounds you, and there is a bit of the sort of the emperor's new clothes in it.
Well, what fascinates you about the Cold War and yeah, about the Cold War. Because you were into that even before we had this second phase of the Cold War that we are now living through.
What I'm particularly interested in right now is how even in discord, and I guess you could look at the Cold War as an example of this, but in moments of clash and no communication and declaration of differences in terms of economics and politics, how there are these other like spheres in which those nations still collaborate. And so what is the sort of public face of discord and what is truly discord, and where does that lie and how is it actually configured? And so sort of looking at it in those terms.
And why, can you maybe explain why you're so interested in Russia and why you're doing a lot of work in Russia?
My roots are Russian, so and well, Belarus and from that area, and so.
Do you speak Russian?
No.
Yeah.
And it's always been a place to which I'm sort of connected in story and passed down through generations, and something that surrounds my upbringing, my life, but to which I have absolutely no connection physically. And so I've always that sort of, again, that space between sort of narrative and the actual, and playing with that, but also just trying to. It's more of a guttural pull as well.
And what was it like to be on Russia Today, the Kremlin-controlled TV? It's like this.
For cutaways?
Yeah, for cutaways.
Well, cutaways is actually something that I didn't plan. So I went to go do that interview, and at the end of the interview, the people asked me to sit and stare at them so that they could use it in their cutting process, because I guess they didn't have multiple cameras.
Yep.
In an American studio, for example, or a more moneyed studio, they would have had 5 cameras and they would have gotten their cutaways from all those different views. So instead they have the single camera, and then they do this, they do a long take where they collect the cutaways. And I mean, it seemed so constructed and artificial and sort of illustrative of so much of Russian media that it was an irresistible piece.
Not only Russian media.
Yes.
Great. I think I'm going to open it up for questions from the audience. I don't know if there's a question there.
Yeah. Will I be heard?
Well, you can come here and say it to the microphone, or I can repeat that.
Well, welcome. Hello, Ms. Simon. I would like to ask, while you were talking about the black square. Sorry. When you were talking about the black square and the endless stream of meanings in science, it kind of reminded me of, for example, Baudrillard. So I wonder if there are any like philosophical books, ideas, or something like that that influenced you, maybe in your studies or later, or is there some school of thought or thought you keep returning to in your work or when thinking about your work?
I mean, I've obviously passed through many schools of philosophical thought, but I don't know if I had to be the spaces where I get my ideas and the sort of pieces that I pursue. I keep these long lists that I return to that I've had for years, and it's just collections of different material that I read or experience, or, you know, for example, just the one we started with last night, where I was, you know, I'm going right after this call to go see the Count of Brexit, but I was at Alexandra Palace for another reason and sort of discovered this whole thing happening. Now I'm returning, but it's, I don't really, it's almost, I'm ashamed to say, but it is something that's true in my work, that I don't look to art or literature for my work. I take my work from science and the news and the world I experience and my interests in time and the past and the future, and I sort of construct these things through my experiences and my travels and different interactions with authority, and one leads to the next, and that's really the most honest answer about my work. And I used to always give lists of names of artists and this and that, and it's just not, it's not true. So.
Well, that's great.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Well, there's a question there.
Yeah, maybe you could just, I know Taryn, so maybe you could just relay this to her about, because you, Michal, were talking about doubt, and what Taryn's been talking about just now is subjectivity, is working from her own subjectivity. So I'm wondering if you could ask her if she could discuss the distinction between those two motivations, let's say, doubt and subjectivity, and are they related?
Could you couldn't hear anything?
Can you tell me? I heard some.
If you can discuss the two motivations, doubt and subjectivity, and the relation between those two.
In my work.
In your work, yeah.
In like, yeah.
Just because of what she was saying about her work, in a way, her work coming out of her own work and her own experience, which is her own subjectivity.
Did you hear that? No.
I just wouldn't say that, so it's easier. Hi, Taryn, it's me. Remember me?
Hi.
I was just interested because also in reading, is it Michal or
Michal?
Michal's excellent essay where you talk a lot about doubt, and and you've talked a lot about the instability of fact, which and sort of the doubts that swirl around facts as they are presented to us. And I was just struck by what you just said about saying that rather than quoting that you've been influenced by Foucault, Baudrillard, whatever else, or like authoritative texts, and let's say post-structuralist texts, which would be doubt par excellence, I guess, that the text that blew texts apart. It's interesting to me that you say that that your work comes out of your own work and therefore out of your own subjectivities. And that's why I was trying to link your essential doubt about the world and question about the world to your own subjectivity. That was all. And so about discussing the two things.
Right.
Sorry if that wasn't clear.
No, it's very clear. It's true. It is, I'm trying to think if there's ever a work I made that doesn't start from a position of doubt, or at least of not knowing. And I mean, it's definitely a root of everything I do. And then, I think there's a certain anxiety that sort of motivates the entire practice. Or I don't even want to call it a practice. Anyway, it's there's an anxiety that just keeps me moving, keeps it coming. So And where I get positioned within that machine, which I guess is what the question is, and how that's kind of constructing perhaps even a certainty within this position of doubt, because claiming a position of doubt is just another, it's actually maybe a stable position ultimately. And that would be, I mean, that's an interesting, it's maybe my form of of standing straight, and that's its own problem as well.
Well, your whole career, if we can call it like that, follows a path of growing skepticism towards the medium that you're using, of doubting the very thing that you're doing so much that now I'm being always asked what is the next step, like where do you go from the innocence to the picture collection where you just photograph photographs, and then the birds where you just cut out already existing materials, and I say, well, stop photographing, but I know that it's not true, but maybe you can say that what's going next. You're moving into sculpture, performance. Is photography dead and done for you?
No, definitely not. But what I think what I'm working when we're talking about the previous question, actually, where I was turning now in my mind of something I wanted to try and circle was a space that is beyond language and beyond photography, something that can't actually be articulated in either form. And in that, I started thinking about a space that opens up in grief and in tragedy, and how that sort of noise and state that occurs post something like that, how that can be, it opens up a void that's very difficult to bring language to. If you just think about yourself, if you lose a child, or if you lose a mother, you lose a state, and the sort of filling of that space, that's a very vulnerable space that can be filled by all sorts of things. And trying to look at that, and the only way I could see looking at that is actually something beyond photography and beyond text. So that translating that inarticulatable space into something physical and into an art object took me to something beyond the photograph and beyond the textual. And that's why now I'm doing a performance piece, and it's sonic, and it's visual, and it requires more time and a continuum, and it's got incorporating all of the senses and the beyond, and it's it was purposefully finding something where the photograph is impossible as a companion. So.
But it's not abandoning photography.
No.
For your
I would
future.
never speak so. I mean, who knows? But for me, every project I've ever done, it doesn't start with photography. It doesn't start with text. It starts with the idea, and these years of research, and photography has always been the machine I've chosen to sort of convey and create these ideas physically. But it's not. I just feel like those definitions don't even apply anymore. and the work sort of goes into whatever direction makes most sense with it. With The Innocents, I actually started with, it was actually a conversation about the photograph itself and how it can be used to create memories and distort memory and allow for fictions. And that has certainly been something that has guided all of my projects ever since, that concept. But you know, the medium can be whatever the medium should be.
Great.
I have one more question.
Shoot.
For you to relate her. Just about where does her obsessiveness with precision, like aesthetic precision, come from?
Where does your obsessiveness with precision, aesthetic precision, comes from? Where does your obsessiveness in general comes from?
I don't know, but I do know that, I mean, for example, my interest in font and design, and you start, I guess if you think back to what I was just saying about The Innocents, how this image being presented with, whether it be a police presence or some sort of manipulative force, your own or exterior, was able to sort of change a history and create another history. It's all of these little details contribute to that. And so when I take that into sort of a microbe level, it involves the turn of a T, and it involves the, you know, the gaps between sentences and what that's going to allow you to read and take away, and all of these different things. And once you go down that rabbit hole, it's just endless, the amount of things that you can pay attention to. Yep. And the signs and symptoms and all of it. And it's, so it does become this kind of craziness. But
yeah, the artwork doesn't end anywhere. It's just endless. Yeah. Well.
And I'm also loathsome to, there's also the element where it's about that, it's conceptual, and then there's also just the carelessness of the world and this sort of like thoughtless approach to too much and being hyper aware of that and wanting it to actually mean something. And I care about the way in which the work is used and the context that surrounds it and all of those little details. It means something to me.
Yeah, well, I'm often surprised that other people don't care about these things surrounding their work, any work, not just artwork.
I mean, me too, but...
There's one more question. But do you still have time, or do you have to run?
Yeah.
Yeah, so...
Hi, thanks for the talk. It's been very, very interesting. I was wondering the whole time, and you touched up on that a few times, but as the work seems so well organized and prepared and precisely thought of and so on, is there a room in your work for accidents, surprises, coincidence, and do you actually like them when during the work it occurs and it leads to somewhere else maybe than you originally planned, and thinking of the work, and also maybe in your private life you like surprises? Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, there are constant accidents in the course of every single project I've done, and they're usually the best parts. Like, for example, all the rejections, all the empty, like A Living Man Declared Dead, with all the empty portraits. When that started happening, I thought I had to abandon the whole project and that it was absolutely ruined and worthless. And it's since become my favorite part of the project. I can't imagine it without those gaps. But it just takes time to recognize an accident and to sort of allow it to become material. So, and my brain doesn't necessarily work as fast as the accidents, but the accidents are a huge component of the work. It just takes me a little time to see it. And I have to go through the pain of not seeing it, and then it arrives.
So, well, one last question probably. One of these points of entrance into those works, which are very, like we said, constructed as a language of authority, where you cannot really enter that from any point because it's so precise and so whole, is the humor, which is something that people usually don't associate with your work. But it's very much present there, especially like in the vitrines of James Bond, where you read all those analogies between James Bond, the ornithologist, with his guns, and James Bond, the agent, with his guns, and his that humor is always that's a very fragile thing to use in this context. How do you approach this?
Right. I mean, I see an element of it in a lot of the projects, actually, and
because sorry to interrupt. Because what I admire about you is that you're so much able to talk about things that are super charged with emotions, sex, violence, drugs, guns, everything, with this almost clinical and scientific, unemotional way, not only in your personal expression, but also in those works, and it creates the tension between those two, and then suddenly from somewhere else comes the humorous part, and that's something unexpected there in the context of indexes and classifications and all that. So,
which is a huge component of when I was saying it's about systems of authority. I mean, there's incredible humor in that and how those things are constructed and maintained. But it's usually there's a simultaneity with the humor and the other aspects. But with James Bond, for example, I mean, it really started from that moment of recognizing that there was this ornithologist and this fictional character, and that you couldn't even read the ornithologist's letters. This human being dedicated his life to studying these birds, and there's a huge archive of all the material he collected, both in terms of his research and his kills, and a lifetime of work has been usurped by this mega fiction that occupies all of our imaginations and makes it impossible to read his letters and not think that they're somehow written by this fictional character. And that collapse is hilarious and simultaneously terrifying. So, and I've always, I feel like that's in almost all of them.
Great. I think that's it. We're gonna have our fingers crossed for the birds to stay in. I don't know if you can influence that somehow.
I just tried to in my car ride over here. It's I have to say, everybody I keep asking which way they're voting, they've been saying they're voting out. It's kind of shocking.
Were they really?
Yeah.
Really?
It's I mean, obviously in, you know, the art circles and stuff, but just walking around asking people, a lot of people are voting out.
Anyway, well, we'll see tonight or tomorrow. Well, thank you very much for and
thank you.
And thanks. That's it.
Okay, I will speak to you soon.
Hopefully, yes.
Yes. Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay. Bye.
Bye. I'll hang up right now.
Yeah, you hang up.
I did just that.